latter years of the 20th century, a secretive American security agent arranged for certain archaeological excavations to be conducted on the Giza Plateau and at other ancient sites in Egypt. These projects were paid for directly by the same agency. It's not totally clear whether the Egyptian government was fully aware of the venture and approved of the reasons why the intelligence services should have an interest in these excavations, or if key officials were simply paid to look the other way. However, prior to this unlikely project, some remarkable and anachronistic glyphs were discovered in the ancient Egyptian temple at Abydos near the village of El Araba El Madfuna. The temple dates from around 3150 BC, and the area, which is sacred to Osiris, the god of life, death and fertility, was a significant location for those who believed in the hereafter. In fact, the ancient Egyptians thought that at sunset the area looked like a golden staircase leading to the afterlife. In other words, this was a place where they could move, either figuratively or literally, from this world to another. The Abydos glyphs, which are carved on a small, otherwise unremarkable section of stone, appear to depict, among other things, an advanced helicopter, two separate, small fixed-wing aircraft, one of which has the appearance of some either submarine or perhaps a spacecraft, and a number of other objects and symbols. Some of the other glyphs on the same stone are more or less standard hieroglyphs and have been deciphered, and as we shall see, their message lends considerable credence to a modern interpretation on the meaning of what is depicted here. The real puzzle is, however, when were they carved? The next logical questions are: A. Were the intelligence services interested in what is depicted in the carvings, which would make sense because their importance is self-evidence? And B. Could this have been based on information originating from the former top-secret Stargate project, which concerned the use of remote viewers by various covert organizations to locate people, places, and objects of interest to them? Perhaps they were, because let's make no bones about it, these carvings cannot be mistaken for anything else. They are representations of modern machines, and why are four of them grouped together in one carving? The authorities claim that this was all a sheer coincidence and the images were just fights of fancy by the stonemasons and nothing more, but this cannot be the case. Were these objects actually seen thousands of years ago by the person who made the carvings? Because if that is the case, then how did they get there? Is this a first-hand pictorial account of time travel, or perhaps an alarming premonition of things that were still to come? If this is the case, are there any more anomalies, this time in the translation of the glyphs, because there is specific mention of one particular mysterious group called the Nine? One translation states that the original carving said, "Who repulses the Nine bows," which was later replaced with, "Who protects Egypt and overthrows the 9 countries." Both of these translations, while acceptable, have to be considered with a further variant forward translation of "Who repulses the 9." All of these translations repeatedly mention the number 9, and as we shall see, coupled with depictions of cutting-edge combat vehicles, appear to indicate and perhaps validate information from another and surprising source. Most people who have seen the groundbreaking film Stargate and the various spin-off TV series will be aware that it concerns the discovery of an ancient alien artifact below the sands of Egypt, a device that transported its users to any point in the galaxy containing another such machine, which would transport them back to their starting point. Before once again considering the remarkable Abydos glyphs and the implications of the translations, we should look at yet another anomalous discovery, this time made at a tomb in Saqqara, which is approximately 40 miles south of Giza. In 1898, an object was discovered that, like many other such finds, due to a lack of anything to compare it to, was labeled as a model bird and placed in the basement of a Cairo museum. The find, which was made approximately 10 years before the Wright brothers' historic flight, was small, made of wood, and when viewed with modern eyes, clearly depicts a high-winged aircraft, rather like a child's glider. Many decades later in 1969, the small model bird was noticed by Dr. Khalil Messiah, a physician and aero modeler, who noticed its strong similarity to a glider. And after investigation by a specially convened committee, the model was rehoused in the prestigious central hall of the museum and labeled as an ancient model aeroplane. Fortunately, Egypt is not the only country where such anomalous artifacts have been uncovered. Many so-called insects have been exhumed from graves and tombs in South America. Even a cursory look at the objects, which are much smaller than the sakwa bird, and cast in precious metal, chiefly gold, reveal that they look nothing like insects, but instead they closely resemble delta-wing aircraft, such as this one from the Gold Museum in Bogota, Colombia. In 1994, Peter Belting and Konrad Lubers carried out an evaluation on the properties of these small objects, created scaled-up models of the insects, and attached engines to them. To their surprise and delight, they flew. However, as one would expect, many naysayers claimed that both the Saqqara bird and the South America insects were exactly that, a model bird and representations of small flies and beetles. Actually, when the insects are viewed, one wonders why the protesters should continue to reject these other explanations, when the small metallic artifacts clearly show a vertical tail, something that insects, whether flying or otherwise, do not have. It's obvious that the bird has a clearly defined tail. Perhaps the answer to this puzzle lies in a bygone era when Egypt was vast and a powerful empire governed by a number of gods called the Ennead. Bearing in mind the repeated use and apparent significance of the number of 9 in the Abydos glyphs, this Ennead comprised 9 deities: Isis, Geb, Nut, Set, Atum, Tefnut, Shu, Osiris, and Nephthys, and each of whom had specific functions in the daily Egyptian life. We also find a remarkable connection between the Ennead and an allegedly extraterrestrial group calling itself the Council of Nine. It has even been suggested that the Nine is in fact a supercomputer with amazing abilities. At this point, we should perhaps consider the presence of Osiris in the Ennead, and also the existence of a symbol intimately connected with Osiris, and that is the Djed Pillar. Some claim that the Djed is a representation of the backbone of Osiris. The appearance of the Djed Pillar, when viewed with modern eyes, gives the appearance of some form of insulator with the presence of 4 flash guards, although tradition insists that this was an emblem of stability. Although the identity of the Ennead is reasonably well established, the identity of the Nine is less so. At one level, they, through accounts channeled by various psychics, announce that they are the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, and the 9 principles of the universe, in other words, some kind of group intelligence. While the subject of the Nine has spawned several books in its own right, most notably The Only Planet of Choice, and the messages contained in the book, as with most channeled information, originating from alleged extraterrestrial entities and mostly ones of well-intentioned advice to the human race. They consider that if it carries on as it is at present, then it is doomed, and to be fair, that seems to be a reasonable assessment. They also remotely promote green issues, and this was long before they became the contentious issues that they are today. It's interesting to note just how many prominent figures became involved in either spreading or were powerfully influenced by their philosophy, including Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. It is possible that Roddenberry's contact with the Nine influenced his choice of material while contributing to the show, but on a much deeper level, perhaps one of the best known of these personalities is the mystic and philosopher Dr. James J. Hurtak. Dr. Hurtak, who claims to have been in contact with the Nine since 1973, promotes their teachings with his internationally famous work, The Keys of Enoch. He also alleges that they have upon occasion actively intervened in the affairs of the human race. Throughout the book, many references are made to light, and we find terms Brotherhood of Light, the People of Light, and one of the verses or keys alludes to Host of the Living Light and the Light of Righteousness. It also comments on the use of a spectra of colored light to break down the barriers of time and consciousness. Are these deliberate references to the existence of the so-called extraterrestrial beings of light? Significantly, Dr. Hurtak also accepts the existence of alternate universes and multidimensional realities, and presumably the means to access them. The Nine, or the supercomputer, are said to live on board a sentient spacecraft called Spectra, which also appears to be mentioned in Dr. Hurtak's work. If Hurtak's interpretations are correct, does he infer that the interference mentioned in connection with the Nine may have involved actual conflict in the far distant past between human beings and an unknown extraterrestrial force? Did the Nine assist on the side of humanity, Or rather, more worryingly, does the translation of the glyphs indicate that the extraterrestrial foe was in fact the Nine? If this is the case, then it is possible that the Nine are not the well-meaning group that they at first appear to be, unless, as suggested, they were assisting the human race against a common foe. This scenario was borne out when one considers the positive nature of Osiris, who, as a ruler, is credited with civilizing his people and turning them away from barbarity and cannibalism. Perhaps the Nine, Ennead, didn't possess the necessary equipment, or perhaps their code of ethics did not allow them to enter directly into combat, so they in effect employed mercenaries recruited from the present era. Again, we find the possibility of time travel. The evidence seems to be there, and it pops out from a variety of sources. The depiction of anomalous machines, the relevance of Abydos, Osiris, and another world, the curious link between the Ennead and the Nine, the repeated reference to the number 9 in the translations of the Abydos glyphs, many little pieces making a much bigger picture. Certainly there seems to be a difference regarding the mechanism by which the contact may have been made, although there might still be a connection. But what is rather heartening is the realization that since we have found apparent evidence of this, then what occurred must have been successful. Otherwise, it would not have been inscribed to commemorate the event. While some think that this is, and indeed has to be, speculative, it is based on readily available, and it has to be said, consistent data. We are already aware that there is work underway trying to develop a method of warping and bending space, and with it time, and this is the only technology that we know about. For it is anyone's guess that what is currently underway in the concealed laboratories funded by lavish budgets. Projects that might look like the wildest kind of science fiction, but as we creep ever closer to the theory of everything, which is the holy grail of theoretical physicists everywhere, then literally nothing is impossible. And who knows, perhaps, as the Abydos glyphs suggest, the conquest of time has already happened.